Fantastic. Well, thank you, everybody. And it's great to have everybody joining us for today's webinar, which is presenting a climate justice case study on extreme heat and public housing tenants in the Kimberley region of Western Australia. My name is Monica Taylor, and I'm leading the Disaster Resilience and Capacity Building project here at Community Legal Service Queensland. I'd firstly, as we begin this afternoon, want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding this afternoon's webinar in Meanjin, and they are the Turrbal and Yagara peoples. And I want to pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that we are conducting this webinar on stolen land and that sovereignty was never ceded. And as this webinar is being viewed by people right across Australia, I also pay respect to the traditional owners throughout the country and extend a very warm welcome to any First Nations people listening this afternoon. So I'm really delighted to welcome Grace Dudley, Systemic Change Advocate from the Kimberley Community Legal Service, who's going to present this afternoon about the lived experience project on the impact of extreme heat on public housing tenants. Grace is going to speak about how this work was conceived, its methodology and its recommendations. And it's a really timely conversation as we all move into a very long and what's likely to be an El Niño fueled summer. It's also relevant because community legal centres here in Queensland and across Australia are really continuing to develop and deepen our understanding of the variety of climate and disaster related legal work that is becoming more and more a feature of the work that we do. Before I hand over to Grace to introduce herself and commence her presentation, I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping. So today's webinar is being recorded and we're going to have the recording available to download later this afternoon or tomorrow. Grace's PowerPoints and the Stuck in the Heat report will also be made available to everybody and that'll be circulated after the session as well. I really encourage you to ask questions. You can do that by typing your question into the box on the control panel, and I'll be monitoring these and we'll read the questions out as we get to the end of the presentation. We will hold those questions until the end, but please feel free to type them in as you think of them. Okay, so I'm now going to hand over to Grace and I'll be back towards the end of the session. Thanks very much, Grace.
Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you everybody for attending. I'm really pleased to be here and to discuss the work that we've been doing for the last couple of years in the housing space and increasingly in the climate justice space. As Monica mentioned, I'm the Systemic Change Advocate at KCLS, which is based in the Kimberley region. I started out there as a lawyer and I guess wanted to work more on the policy and civil legal problems that our clients face day to day in a way that perhaps can affect some longer term change. So I'll get into it. So just as an overview of what I'll try and get through today, I'll do a bit of an introduction of the Kimberley and our service for those who aren't familiar, and with some of the unique aspects of our region. And then I'll go into talking about the starting point of our project in terms of identifying a specific policy issue that kind of kick-started our project. I'll go through the methodology of our consultation processes, go through our findings, giving you a bit of a taste of the lived experience focus of our report, go through the recommendations, and then finish off with a little bit about how we've been able to use the report with our advocacy. So just to contextualize everything, as Monica mentioned, this is the final report that we released late last year, and it's available online and will be available to you later to read through. It's all about exploring this idea of habitable housing done in a culturally safe and lived experience focus. And through those discussions with tenants, it revealed some broader problems with the housing system, the energy system, and some broader health and wellbeing impacts throughout the community as well. So I'll go into more detail later about all of those things, but I thought I'd just provide some context to start with. So the Kimberley region, for those who aren't really familiar, it's a huge geographical area that we cover. It's really diverse, a lot of different Aboriginal communities and language groups, very culturally strong, very hot, and that's going to be increasing as the climate projections suggest. A lot of people in the Kimberley rent, and so that makes them particularly vulnerable to climate impacts, and a lot of people rent through public housing, in particular Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members of the community. Our cost of living is extremely high, and we have some broader systemic issues to do with overcrowding and homelessness in the region as well. And so our service operates in this context. We provide holistic legal, financial and social work support across the region, travelling to a lot of different remote communities. So we're in a very unique position to be able to understand the complex and I guess diverse needs and concerns of our clients. And I guess part of our goals recently has been to also think about ways we can think about whether the laws that apply to people in the Kimberley are working and work towards law reform, and to do so in a way that facilitates community participation and to ensure that our work reflects the needs of the community. And so we started the systemic change advocate role with those goals in mind. We wanted to remain client-centric, keep our client experiences at the centre of any advocacy work we do. And so housing is was our main priority at the time and still remains a really, really important advocacy priority. It's incredibly important in so many ways. We see it as really central to people's ability to participate in their community. Housing is a social determinant of health and well-being, and that's particularly the case for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who often don't have access to very good quality housing, and that's going to be exacerbated in the climate context. And as a CLC, tying it back to our civil legal practice, access to housing that's adequate, habitable, and available is so key to so many of our core legal problems like child protection or family violence. And I guess on top of that, we're always thinking about the climate up in the Kimberley. It is an ever-present issue. It's incredibly hot at the moment. It's getting up to 40 degrees most days. And we can see with some of these statistics that at present, it's incredibly hot for 200 plus days a year, and that's set to increase in Kununurra to 253 days a year over 35. In Fitzroy Crossing, for example, by 2090, temperatures will be largely over 40 degrees most days. And so there's a real urgency, I guess, to this issue, and we were really cognizant of this, I guess, increase in temperatures in the context of the housing system in the region. And so those two things together really make a climate justice issue. There's concerns, about the ability of people to continue to live on their land in these extreme temperatures. And in the same vein, it's well established that public housing tenants and renters are among the first to be affected by climate impacts. They have less market power to improve their the conditions of their housing, and less money to spend on appliances and on power bills and things like that. So amongst all of this mess, I guess, we see ourselves, and I think a lot of community legal centres see themselves as very, linked with these issues, assisting some of the most vulnerable people on a day-to-day basis, and knowing that a lot of issues that public housing tenants face or renters face, whether it be tenancy issues or whether it be family violence, a lot of those concerns will be exacerbated by climate change. So that's just, I guess, an overview of where we were at when we decided to start thinking about some advocacy options. So I'll go into the policy issue that we identified, which is quite a discrete and small policy, but we needed to focus on something, I guess, discrete to begin with. And as our consultation showed, once you start discussing something, a lot of other outcomes and issues arise. So we initially focused on the discrepancy between what public housing tenants and government employee tenants are provided. So the Department of Communities are the landlord for both sets of these tenants. So you can see on this table that the climate control policy for public housing tenants provides a very minimal set of cooling options for people living in the Kimberley. So basically they're provided with a ceiling fan and a hole in the wall called an aperture to put an air conditioner in, but they're expected to purchase, install, maintain and remove their air conditioner when they leave the property. On the other hand, regional employees, such as nurses or lawyers from legal aid, different government employees are provided housing by the Department of Communities as well. And we can see that they're provided under their air conditioning policy with a set of quite good protections from the heat, including good quality air conditioners, a subsidy in recognition of the high cost of power in the region, and several other things that can assist with providing better thermal comfort throughout hotter periods of the year. So yeah, we were kind of, I guess, shocked by the simplicity of this policy. There isn't really any recognition that it's an extremely hot part of the state. And as we can see at 4.2, yeah, tenants are responsible for the fitting and maintenance of their own air conditioning units installed in department properties. And when reading the government employee air conditioning policy that's also administered by the Department of Communities, there's a whole, I guess, methodology around measuring why certain households will need protection from the heat, taking into account the effect of climate conditions on the human body. And so we can see in this image that it appears that in the Kimberley, there's 200 days of discomfort, which is why that's the rationale behind these tenants being given air conditioning. So there's obviously a real discrepancy between how some tenants are being treated compared to others. And unfortunately, the Residential Tenancies Act in WA didn't provide any further protections to tenants, and still doesn't. It's pretty light on in terms of minimum standards, and certainly doesn't have any reference to energy efficiency minimum standards. So that left us thinking about the consequences of all of these policies. And we knew that things like this were happening. If you're not provided with air conditioning and you don't have a whole lot of money, you're renting, and you're expected to remove the unit when you leave, that set of policy conditions kind of leads to some examples like this, which I'll go into a bit later. And it really got us thinking about the right to adequate housing, which is relatively well established in documents like the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, with specific mention of the right to habitability as well. And that really goes to the protection against heat, rain, wind, other threats to health and structural hazards. And that obviously hasn't translated into the policies in WA as of yet. And there's been some movement, and we had kind of noted that while we were doing our background research, that in the Santa Teresa case in the Northern Territory, which is currently for the High Court of Australia, that case really originated through 70 claims by tenants in Santa Teresa to do with the failure to carry out repairs and to provide this habitable housing. So there's certainly some movement in that area, but in the case of WA, we were definitely keen to, I guess, bring some attention to this issue. And so we, with all of that kind of research in mind and decision to focus on that policy area, we wanted to, instead of assuming that specific issue was the problem and just go ahead without any consultation, we really wanted to talk to tenants and see how they felt about their housing and how they felt about not being given air conditioners, how they deal with the heat. Yeah, just really talking to them about their experiences. And so we commenced our consultations in late 2021 in some of the hottest conditions of the year. It was getting over 40 degrees quite often, and we spoke to people in person, in small groups, with the assistance of an Aboriginal consulting agency to ensure cultural safety and ensure the comfort of people and making sure that they feel safe to be able to say how they feel. So we did small group consultations in the East Kimberley. We did some unstructured interviews with a couple of tenants in Kununurra who were very generous with their time and their feedback. We were assisted by Kimberley GGOs as well to do a online survey to get a bit more of a Kimberley-wide response, asking questions about their air conditioning, about their housing, about the effect of the heat on their families and their communities. And we also spoke to some service providers as well, like financial capability workers and tenant advocates who see the impacts of these policies on their clients day to day and had some really valuable input as well. So why a lived experience focus? As I said before, it's, I think, really easy to assume what tenants might want or what main concerns are. And in the context of a Kimberley where we're working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tenants in particular, it's really important to think about those assumptions and take a step back and listen and centre the stories of tenants because they're more accurate and definitely more powerful and interesting than statistics as well. And we've certainly had a lot of good feedback from people who have read the report who find it, I guess, a lot more moving and provides a lot more insight into the systemic problems facing the region. So this story is de-identified, but Sarah's story kind of provides a really good context of the kind of things we were hearing from tenants. She yeah, we spoke to her when it was over 40 degrees. It was incredibly oppressive. She was really, really unwell. She has had health issues for a long time. Like many tenants, she's relying on a Centrelink and income, and her house is really poorly insulated and becomes incredibly hot during the day, and she's unable to afford a better air conditioner than the one that she has in her living room. And so when the house gets hot, she's turning the air conditioner. Turning the air conditioner makes no difference to the internal temperatures. She worries about the cost of her power bills. And you can see in this quote that she's just so distressed and worried about her health and her ability to continue living through this heat. And her story was unfortunately one of many that just was very distressing. So through all these stories, which I'll go into more a bit later, we really found that poor quality public housing, maintenance issues and overcrowding had a real impact on the ability of public housing tenants to control the temperatures of their homes and the energy efficiency of their homes. And as a result, many tenants were experiencing energy poverty due to really high energy prices and being forced to use basically inefficient cooling appliances. They're not provided with a good quality one and they're on a low income. It's really difficult to afford something that works properly and is efficient. And so, yeah, our third finding really was around this, this current climate control policy really tending to reinforce the already crippling financial disadvantage experienced by a lot of tenants in the Kimberley region. And we really found through all of our consultations that this exposure to high house temperatures was impacting people's ability to stay physically well, as well as kind of participate in their community effectively as well. So I'll just go through those findings, I guess, with a little bit more of the lived experience feedback to give it some life and some context. In terms of housing quality, you know, a lot of people were talking about their houses being like incinerators or like heat boxes or, you know, words like that that are pretty hard hitting and go to the fact that the type of housing that people are provided in the Kimberley isn't necessarily appropriate for the climate, for cultural needs, and a lot of tenants just felt that their housing was, you know, designed in Perth or in places that didn't understand the specific climate of this region. And so, yeah, a huge amount of our respondents felt that their houses get too hot for long parts of the year, and they go to all sorts of measures to try and cool their houses down, which is another indicator that current housing isn't necessarily built to adapt to the climate that is in the Kimberley, and of course the increasing temperatures that we're expecting in the next 20 plus years. In terms of maintenance, once again, people really gave us a lot of feedback about the difficulty they have keeping their housing in any sort of good level of thermal comfort when there are extreme maintenance to be attended to, like holes in the wall, like this photo shows, you know, broken windows or doors. There's just really no point using an air conditioner if that's the case, or it makes it difficult to regulate temperatures generally anyway. And so it was really common to hear of, I guess, maintenance issues that had perhaps been reported, but due to the maintenance system being largely operated out of Perth. There can be a lot of administrative errors or delays, and it certainly can be more of a reactive maintenance system. And perhaps in the future, due to climate change in particular, we may need to look towards more of a preventative maintenance system. And I think the maintenance kind of part of the puzzle really links into the way community legal centres are kind of at the forefront of these issues. I can speak on for KCLS, like we certainly, our social workers and our lawyers assist clients really regularly with reporting maintenance issues and appealing tenant liability and things like that. So what may seem like a discrete civil legal issue certainly can have climate implications as well. In the same vein, overcrowding was probably one of our biggest feedback points. Many tenants were living in overcrowded circumstances, or new family members or other people that were dealing with overcrowding. Again, if you have 10 to 15 people living in a 3-bedroom house, there's very little chance of people being able to regulate the internal temperature or bother trying to use cooling appliances. And it kind of leads to stories like this, which is a story from our report. This lady has 2 children. She's living with 12 other people. She's hasn't got any good way to regulate the temperature in her house. She and her mother are in a huge amount of arrears with Horizon Power, the provider up here. And as a result of the heat and the overcrowding, she's finding it difficult to keep her house clean, and it's leading to sickness in her children. So it's a really complex, multifaceted issue. Another huge part of our feedback was around financial disadvantage, energy poverty, and the difficulty people were facing in terms of affording air conditioning. Is really where the
I think we might just be losing you a little bit, Grace. The internet seems to have dropped out a little bit for you.
This really reference to light, and this photo is a great example of that. Some air conditioner, so she called you to so that in a position where she's putting her health and her grandchildren's health at risk by not being able to regulate her home's temperature to the extent that she needs to. And so we found this to be a really common issue in terms of the economic impact of these kind of policies on public housing tenants. So here we just did a breakdown of 4 different people and how much of their income they spend on their power bills. And we can see that public housing tenants on Centrelink are paying 9 to 15% of their income in these cases. That's not to say everybody does, but certainly indicative of national statistics that also show that renters pay a lot more on their power than others. And we can see here with the government employees who have a subsidy and are provided with energy efficient air conditioning, they're paying less than 1% of their income on power. So there's a real disadvantage there. And again, these kind of issues feed into the day-to-day work of community legal centres again, whether it be thinking about the inadequacy of Centrelink payments, whether it be potential issues with financial abuse when money gets really tight. and in our case, we have with financial counselling, issues with being disconnected, and that the whole issue of energy poverty, of needing to think so carefully about how much money you spend on power, and it has such big impacts on the community and on health and well-being. Oh, sorry about that. So in that vein, in terms of health and well-being, that one of the, I guess, the more interesting and kind of not surprising, but bigger parts of our report was this impact on health and well-being. Lots of tenants reported feeling a lot more stressed, a lot more unwell, whether that just meant, you know, dehydration and dizziness, or whether it meant, you know, the exacerbation of their existing illnesses. So with Sarah's story earlier, she spoke about how the heat had a huge impact on her ability to manage her epilepsy. Other people spoke to me about their mental illnesses getting worse when it gets hotter. Certainly also has a bigger impact on children and elderly people. Lots of people spoke about the difficulty they have sleeping, even things like storing medication or being able to administer dialysis from home is impossible if you don't have a cool area of your house. So there are a huge range of issues that having, I guess, not having access to habitable housing, not having the ability to financially afford thermal comfort has on the community. And this extends not just to physical health, but we found that a lot of tenants spoke to us about the difficulties they had with things like getting to work. You know, some people talked about their staff not being able to, like service providers talked about their staff not being able to get to work because mums are managing their sick kids at home, or it taking, you know, 3 or 4 hours more for someone to do their tasks because they've not been able to sleep the night before, or they're very tired from the heat. Others spoke about school attendance, and there was a lot of feedback on, you know, there just being an increase in irritability, in just stress, in antisocial behaviour, and that kind of feeds into the broader kind of economic and social impacts of this climate justice issue around inhabitable housing, the increasing heat and the stress that causes. And there's some research on the costs that might have, you know, increasing crimes, increasing health impacts, and increasing need for crisis services. You know, it would be really interesting for there to be more research on the, I guess, the impact or the cost of that, as opposed to investment in better housing and energy policies. And there's been some research in Victoria that showed an increase in demand for family violence services during hotter weather. And we've got this graphic here that hopefully you can make out that we got some stats from the WA Police Force, and we just separated them out into seasons. So here we can see assault spikes in the build-up, which is the hottest part of the year, and certainly seems to be slightly lower in the colder months of the year. Obviously, that's just an observation and we can't 100% verify it, but based on our feedback from tenants, it certainly seems to be the case that there's certainly increased stress, and even things like people will spend more time in the one house that has an air conditioner, so that increases overcrowding even more, things like that. So all of that feedback came together as some recommendations based on what our tenants wanted, and based on some research in other jurisdictions. In the short term, given the immediacy of this issue, improving access to air conditioning and subsidising the cost of electricity together is certainly something that might be effective in the short term, along with investment in solar. The long-term needs are certainly improving livability and energy efficiency, ensuring that housing is climate resilient, that there are enough houses for everybody, and that there are minimum energy efficiency standards to ensure that no matter if you're a homeowner or a public housing tenant, you're provided with the same standards, which will become increasingly important to the survival of the region. So we've released the report, and we've been able to send it out to a lot of different people and use it in our advocacy work quite effectively. We've been able to really centre our advocacy in this vein of pushing for more sustainable and better quality housing. We've had some positive contact with members of Parliament in WA. We've had some great feedback from policy officers in government who have taken our work on board and, given its lived experience lens, have found it to be quite useful. Given the topical nature of climate and housing at the moment, we've had some great media coverage. We've been able to present our findings at conferences, which just increases our visibility and provide some context to, you know, the day-to-day struggles of tenants in the Kimberley, which is a very, far away corner of Australia. And we've really enjoyed collaborating with other advocates. We're a very small service. It's really just me working on this, so it's great to be able to work with others on issues like, pushing for minimum energy efficiency standards and stuff like that. We've had some really positive discussions with the power provider in the Northwest who, are really keen to try and increase public tenants' ability to afford their power bills and have more energy efficiency. And yeah, there's always different opportunities in the future to, I guess, get this report out there and get the messages of our tenants and everyone that contributed to the report out there. Obviously, the Fitzroy floods, so in terms of opportunities in the future, the floods really just demonstrated, again, the importance of climate resilient housing into the future. And we, again, really recommend that, localised, culturally appropriate solutions are at the forefront of everyone's minds in that space. We're encouraged to see that the National Housing and Homelessness Plan is really looking at ways to improve sustainable housing and prepare housing for the effects of climate change. So we'll certainly be providing our report to that consultation process. And there's some really positive conversations going on at the moment around minimum standards. There's currently a review of the Residential Tenancies Act, which will hopefully see some movement on that issue. And certainly seems to be a bit of discussion about that on the national agenda too. So yeah, that's just a little snapshot. I mean, there's so much work to be done on this issue, but yeah, we're really happy to share that with everybody else and hope to work together in the future as well. And I think that's it for me, but happy to take any questions from anybody.
Thank you, Grace. That was very sobering, but really insightful, and you've really brought to life the research for us all. There is a question that goes to the point about strategic public interest litigation, and somebody asking whether Kimberley Community Legal Service has ever brought a discrimination claim against the Department of Communities in relation to that disparity between government housing tenants and public housing tenants?
We haven't. We're very small, so we don't have the resources ourselves, but we're certainly, I mean, it's an interesting thing to explore, and it's encouraging to see how it's been handled in the Northern Territory. And we're really interested to see the results of the Santa Teresa High Court ruling as well, because that may have some impacts throughout Australia in terms of compensation and habitability. So yeah, it's an interesting area, but we ourselves have not had the capacity to do that as of yet. But it's certainly something that interests, yeah.
Yes, all eyes on Santa Teresa and the High Court. It'll be very interesting to see what happens there. I wondered if you could, and just to our audience, if you do have questions, please pop them in the chat so I can put them to Grace. One thing I wanted to ask, Grace, is your role as a systems advocacy role within a generalist community legal centre. And I just was wondering what your kind of thoughts and observations are about having that role alongside casework functions in a CLC, particularly in issues that relate to climate change and climate impacts, and that ability to sort of point out some of those deeper structural issues and their connection to all the other associated social issues that are in play. Are you able to just speak a little bit about how you found that policy space within I guess the benefit of that alongside casework?
Yeah, I think community legal centres are in a really good position to be able to feedback what's happening on the ground. Like, it might not be an obvious kind of link, but as I hope my presentation kind of showed, that the impact of climate change is, you know, on everyday people dealing with the same problems that they've always had, but they're more exacerbated by things like extreme heat. And so I certainly saw the policy advocacy type role as a natural fit at a community legal centre, where every day our social workers, our financial counsellors and our lawyers are talking to people about the problems that they're facing every single day. And so being able to use that information to guide our advocacy is really helpful. And then, yeah, being able to kind of almost inadvertently like place a climate lens over things it's not a stretch, if that makes sense. It kind of fits, especially in a context like the Kimberley, where we all think about the weather and the climate so much. It has such an impact on our day-to-day lives already. So yeah, and I think the systemic advocacy role is really helpful in, you know, the frontline workers don't have time to think about those broader effects, but in the policy space we have time to think about those systemic issues and how they relate to other issues like climate change. And you know, it's been really good being able to collaborate with other people across the state, because it's certainly something that requires a whole of sector effort. But yeah, it's been really fruitful, I think, to have the policy advocacy role within the CLC space.
Great. There's another question that asks about how we can actually support more lived experience being at the centre of work like this, and whether the tenants you interviewed were remunerated for providing their lived experience expertise in this work.
Yeah, it's certainly something that you have to do sensitively, and I think for us it was really important to have an Aboriginal consultancy to lead those discussions, to provide safety, and you know, we only spoke to people who wanted to do it. It wasn't forced or anything like that, and everyone was remunerated with, I think it was, I can't remember the amount, but it was organised by the consultant. But yes, they were acknowledged for their work. But I think if going forward, I think if you're going to use lived experience feedback all of the time, it certainly would be worth thinking about it being obviously more of a formalised payment. And I think some organisations like WA Council of Social Services, they have like a lived experience framework. And so there's a lot of work being done in the space because it is becoming such an important way to communicate the problems with policies and laws across Australia. So yeah, I guess from my experience doing this small project, I would encourage, obviously, if you're working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, to be very culturally safe and respectful. And another thing that I've found helpful is that I've continued to communicate with some of the people that wanted to be updated on the progress of the report, and provide them with copies and let them know what I've been up to, so they feel like their contributions have been effective. And people in the Kimberley are really used to kind of someone coming in and talking to them and never seeing them again, so that can be important as well.
Certainly. No, that's great. Thank you. And there's just another question about the recommendations. So there was no recommendations that sort of spoke about energy sovereignty, but there's other sort of examples out there of communities actually controlling kind of access to power through batteries and so forth. Is that something that kind of came up, or any sort of insights on that?
It didn't come up in our consultations. I think people were more worried about just being able to afford their power. And so discussions around, I guess, solar and stuff like that are certainly important, but I guess a lot of people just wanted it to be cheaper. And I know that part of that conversation is energy sovereignty, but we didn't really have conversations around that in particular. But I do think there are some projects in the Kimberley where communities do have their own solar, or they're working towards that. And that's really positive, because there's, a lot of evidence around obviously relying on power cards, which is quite common in the Kimberley, which is like prepaid power. That can lead to a lot of disconnections, and that's kind of the opposite of energy sovereignty, and a lot of people aren't enjoying that process, I guess. So I think there's a lot of opportunity and work to be done in that space up in the Kimberley, especially because we have such unlimited sun. So there's a real opportunity, I think, to improve that space.
Fantastic. Yes, it is also important to always highlight the opportunities as well as the kind of concerning reality of climate change. Another person in the audience has just said, great work, brilliant, thank you very much, Grace. I think that's probably a lovely point on which to bring the session to a close. So I just really want to thank you, Grace, for all of your time and effort, obviously your thought leadership in pulling this work together and rolling it out, and all the learnings that we can all benefit from it. I'd like to thank our audience for being so terrific and your questions that came through and your engagement. And just to let everybody know, there'll be a feedback survey that pops up once this is closed off. So if you could please give us some feedback, that always helps us improve, and we can pass that feedback on to Grace as well. For those in the audience who are working at a Queensland Community Legal Centre, a reminder that we are running, as part of this project, a learning exchange, disaster and climate justice learning exchange. The next one of those is next Wednesday, October, on the 11th of October. If you'd like to come along and continue the conversation about deepening our knowledge around climate and disaster justice, then please do reach out to me so I can add you onto the mailing list for that. But otherwise, thank you very much for your attendance this afternoon, and we hope to see you at the next CLCQ webinar. Bye for now.